All right, this is Rich. Today is Sunday, May 31st. We are continuing our discussion on faith and politics. Today's topic is going to be primarily on a summary of what we learned in phase one, how would Jesus vote? But we'll cover a couple other items as well. Okay, guys, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, it's good.
All right,
Yes.
so this is just going to be an overview of the book. So we're not going to go into a lot of coverage of the reasons why the principles are the way they are. It would be in either the summaries, which are all posted in the Slack, chapter by chapter, or feel free to refer the book. But we try to stay true to what Dr. Bach is summarizing here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so feel free to ask any questions. The reason why we're sharing this is because by understanding this and having a little cheat sheet, or at least 3 cheat sheets here, we kind of have a general idea of how we're going to facilitate our table groups in the direction that kind of would want to be biblically, at least with Elmbrook folks. When we get to the with the community, that's going to be a little bit different, but at least for Elmbrookers, we kind of have to know from a respected theologian at Dallas Theological Seminary, this is how he's interpreting this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first 3 chapters, we did it all together. And really, like some of these quotes, integrate, not isolate, in essentials unity, and non-essentials liberty, in all things charity. He brought up a very good point that it's not quite the right question to say big government or small government. Many of us evangelicals like small government, but and actually a better question is, how do we love our neighbors? So I thought he framed it really well. That's the better way we should challenge all of our fellow Christians on any solution that we come up with in terms of policy with the government should be couched in, working with the government to love our neighbors. And then the other thing he advocated as foundational for our class or for anybody reading the book is that Jesus in the Bible does not lay out specific policy positions.
Yeah.
Certain principles we follow, and there's plenty of give and take within these principles. So hopefully these principles will see the space in which the solutions can play out, but it doesn't mean that there is only one solution. That is the power of political discourse, and we'll find something within there. Like, for example, if we go to the topic of race, slavery is not going to be in the solution space. It'd be like it's an extreme example, of course, but that's an example. But we would say, do we do A, B, or C, or C, D, and E, or B, D, and F? Those are things that what we have to leave in the discourse. Another thing was just to be very careful of people who try to make final discussions as false binaries, as only 2 choices. When very rarely are there only 2 choices. I think it's always good to have 2 choices just to keep things simple, but then you have to layer on nuances and additional complexity of more and more elements involved in a lot of these meaty issues.
Right.
Okay, so that was kind of setting the stage in chapters 1 through 3 here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, chapter 4 was on the topic of poverty. And really, maybe Lee, do you want to read this little paragraph here?
Sure. So scripture gives dignity to labor and calls for nurturing responsible contribution to society, affirms and adequately rewards those who work, emphasizes that most jobs should serve our neighbors. We need to rejoice in and steward our creation well, keeps an eye out for injustice and seeks to remove it, shows an active, compassionate concern for the poor.
Yep. Thank you, Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you could just, as you read all this, I get a couple things out of this, right? First of all, work is a good thing. There's dignity in labor. But then this overwhelming, we're exuding love and compassion here, which is exactly the message of the Bible. It ties very well with this book and faith, love your neighbor. So I think we just have to make sure that we're encouraging the permeation of love, compassion, uh, out to people as we minister in this class. One important thing for people to realize, and I will confess that probably we as evangelicals don't see this as much, is there are certain systemic things that are happening in our society that block opportunity for certain groups.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind. We'll talk more about that in the racism place. But I think, again, for most evangelicals who tend to lean to the right, we probably could open our eyes here more. And then another thing is, this can be a little bit touchy sometimes, particularly when poverty refers to a lot of entitlement programs, which are four-letter words
Yeah.
to many of us. But he encouraged to say, look, you have to look at the bigger picture, not just use data that only supports your side. Confirmation bias, if you've ever heard of that term. And again, remember, this is another principle of the false binary doesn't exist, is that justice, mercy, compassion, and responsibility can all work together. So some comments from us here is for those on the left, have them think about, well, how is our system of addressing poverty working today? If they're honest intellectually, it's probably not that great. We have some things that we have to do to make sure that we're not building dependency on a system that rewards the wrong behaviors. But just because the system has some flaws does not mean that the idea of helping out people is fundamentally wrong altogether.
Right.
That brings the challenge to the right and say, okay, well, now think about what if you're one of the working poor, you're working, a full week's worth of honest labor, and yet you still can't make ends meet. You're struggling. What about somebody who's a hard worker, but they are doomed to stay in their low economic class? They never have a chance of having the same opportunities as a child of a rich suburban, like we are. I'm just speaking for me and Lena here, and our kids have every advantage, right? I mean, we got to think about things. So any comments, questions on chapter 4 here?
Very good.
All right. Let's move on to healthcare. Anyone want to read the healthcare paragraph here?
Sure. Healthcare is complicated, but the idea that medical care should be open to everyone reflects core moral principles that life is precious and that we should be concerned for our neighbor. Because core human needs are involved, this cannot be a strictly market-driven decision. If we choose to follow Jesus, we must seek to care for one another.
Okay, so this one, very personal to me. I have some expertise in this space since I do work in healthcare. Susan, you too, as a physician. So I agree. This is probably one of the most complicated issues that we'll have to work through here. Just because it's complicated doesn't mean that we don't try. And I really, again, go back to the core principle we brought out is, look, this is about loving our neighbors. The solution space that we want to go to is more about expanding care to make it more accessible and affordable and of appropriate quality for all Americans here. And I really like that he came out very specifically and said, because human needs are involved, this cannot be a strictly market-driven decision. Again, more on farther to the right, those of us farther to the right, and I certainly am a capitalist, but to say that this is strictly market-driven, I think is a difficult case to make, because information here is asymmetric. It's not even, so you don't have full information that makes a market. In many cases, you are compelled to seek that care, like in the case of a motorcycle accident, like what Susan was describing earlier, or if you get cancer, you don't really have a choice. And the whole basic market-driven economy is based on choice and is based on 100% information, neither of which always play out in healthcare. So I think that kind of defines a solution space that we are not going to, if we're following biblical principles, we're not going to pursue a complete market-driven solution. In fact, it more is, how do we expand this in a way that addresses all Americans to have healthcare? So,
Rich, I I wasn't part of the first cycle. I did get the book, so I'm working my way through it. But are the key principles derived from Dr. Bach's talk, and the comments are yours, or how are you presenting that?
Yeah, so the key principles are from Dr. Bach's book, and I put some comments in here, just more mine.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so we tried to stay true to what he's saying. Certainly, like if you read another book, like by Wayne Grudem, Politics According to the Bible, he disagrees with this. But that book was ghostwritten by somebody very, very extreme on one side. But
Yeah.
we've tried to stay true to what Dr. Bach said in this middle column.
Can you comment about the decoupling insurance from work? Is that kind of your take on it because of opportunity, if people lose a job, or?
Yeah, this is my take on it. Just
Mhm.
seeing how work is such a big factor in whether you have insurance or not, particularly for
Yeah, yeah,
driven by our history in the U.S. of after the Depression and entering into World War II. A lot of employers could not raise wages, so they started to sell benefits.
right.
When insurance became a differentiator in order to attract workers, as we were, going into that boom of the boomer generation.
Interesting.
But now, if you lose work, like if I were to leave GE today,
Yeah,
I would have no ability
I
to
know.
get insurance.
Yeah,
Well,
Right?
affordable
To
insurance.
get
affordable.
That's the key.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, and I understand that because we served with InterVarsity for a period, and so I left my job and had a transition where we lived in the UK for a year, came back and did support raising for a while. And those were periods where we didn't have access to good medical care. Well, in the UK, it was awesome, actually,
Mhm.
because even though we were visitors there, they provided medical care for us. How's that, Um, and back here in the US, we had minimal insurance, just kind of emergency kind of a things. And then when we transitioned back after our time in Ecuador, we had pretty much almost the better part of a year where I didn't have regular employment that paid insurance. So we felt very vulnerable during those times, and was very grateful for the Badger Care back in 2002. And I, I think there'd be a lot more entrepreneurial efforts if insurance was available for reasonable costs. I think we'd be a more innovative country. So that one kind of touches me too. So it's interesting that your comments there.
Yeah, if you go all the way to the other side, on the Bernie side that says get rid of private insurance, well, I don't think that's quite the answer either.
Yeah, I don't.
For both public and private.
Yeah.
In the UK, the Brits love the NHS, even though they know it's not perfect and they won't.
Right.
But man, anybody who criticizes the NHS from outside of the country, they will defend right away. So
Right.
did my European friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
And if, excuse me, if I could interject too, I think I shared this before, that it was because my brother John, with his disability,
Right.
he was on Medicare and Medicaid. And even though he became, I got him out of the sheltered workshop and he became employed, he could never work a full-time job to get the kind of benefits that most employers during those years were offering.
Right.
But my point is that with this safety net of healthcare under him, it allowed him to have a healthier life, have access to healthcare, so that he could work as long as he did,
Right.
yep.
despite his disability.
Mhm.
So, I mean, to me, there's a real need to have this access extended to everyone during
Right.
their life.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think when we facilitate that is kind of the solution, right? We're not saying all public health or all private, but we are saying how do we find a way that all Americans have access to cost-effective healthcare that is of reasonable quality to address their medical and health needs.
Right.
Okay, well, yeah,
Good. Okay.
hours and hours on this one. This was the
Yeah.
purpose of today, but certainly all of these are tough.
No, I appreciate both of your insights because you're both got a lot more background in the medical field than I do. So
Yeah, and even then, it's hard to see the whole thing. I mean, it is complex.
complicated. Yeah.
All right, so immigration,
Hmm.
complex in one sense, but not as complex as healthcare, in my mind. And so he actually, in the book, had some specific proposals for immigration, which I found interesting. So he said, "Hey, look, it's completely messed up how we do immigration in the U.S. If Jesus, was here, I mean, it abounds in the Old Testament of how much we are to care for the alien among us. That's the word you,
Right.
right? So you see Ulrich heading in direction with both refugees and immigrants. They said, okay, we gotta like put a date in the future. We can secure the border with whatever recommendations are there. That's important. But we also have to provide a pathway for people to extend their visas from within the US. So a big for all of us was that, man, people, if they overstayed their visa, they can't extend it. They have to leave the country, then come back and try to reapply, and there's no guarantee. This is the fundamental
Right.
for the visa overstayers.
Right.
So his proposal was, look, set a date, maybe it's 10 years from now, saying we're going to start opening the line for citizenship. But if you are here illegally and you overstayed your visa, which is the bigger part of the issue, not so much the crossing the border, even though we want to secure the border, he said, because we need to honor the rule of law and
Mm-hmm.
you need to go to the back of the line. You need to register for this new program, otherwise you'll be deported. But if you register, you can stay. You don't need to leave your family. That ties with the values of your family. Go ahead.
Right. So what does it mean to go to the back of the line?
So, yeah, if you extended your visa a long time ago, you're going to be waiting. You're going to be waiting for August because you've been living illegally the longest.
Okay, so the people who came 20 years ago would be at the back of the line?
Yep, because they've been enjoying the benefits of being here without saying anything.
Okay.
All right, so it's kind of interesting. Again, that probably could be open for debate here. This
Yeah.
was just proposing. It was more, the big thing is because Christians care about family, and Jesus was so strong about that, and we'll get to that later when we talk about family. We don't
Right.
leave the country and leave their families without any guarantee that they can come back.
Yeah, no hope for it coming back even. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it could also be, instead of citizenship, permanent residence, right? I mean, there's room for discussion.
Yeah, I would say that he was kind of clear about
Yeah,
citizenship.
citizenship.
Again, so we won't go into the detail here, but obviously if you killed someone and you're a rapist or murderer or whatever, you're probably not going to be able to do this.
They're
Right.
getting deported.
So there's a whole bunch of exceptions. These are just the summaries of the general principles.
Yep. Good.
And another principle was like, look, we need to have realistic and generous quotas for immigrants coming in. We have really squeezed to an unrealistic number and target, and so having this as befits the I think the strong history of our country.
Right.
So what I put is, again, this false binary, people saying you can't have secure borders and a pathway to citizenship. No, you can. They are
Yeah.
inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay, any comments or thoughts on chapter 6?
No. It's good.
All right, yeah, I thought it was well thought out when we read it. I actually liked the proposal.
You talk about fines.
Yeah, they could pay a fine
Yeah, we should
too.
just add that.
Yeah, it wasn't in the original notes.
Oh,
But
it
we'll
wasn't?
have to look.
Okay.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
we would totally be open if they pay a fine instead, or go to, I mean, some sort of way
Consequence.
to show
Yeah.
that they honor the rule of law, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, hey, pay $1,000 or whatever, do this, assuming, again, you're a person we would want as citizens who hasn't committed a violent crime.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, guns. So interesting for Wisconsinites. Okay, so he had a very interesting proposals here. So, in the book, it went over things about how people carried swords and stuff back then. So we won't really go into that. But here were his 5 proposals. He proposed a better national instant background check database. He said align state and federal penalties for gun crimes. And then here's one that'll be a little bit touchy. Require background checks for anyone buying a gun, including at gun shows. And then he said really clamp down on straw purchasers of guns, which is how the bad guys get their guns these days.
Yeah.
And then I thought this was very innovative. I had not thought about this until I read the book, but look, most of us drive, right?
Yeah.
Of us who drive, do we have a problem with having to register our car, having to have it inspected, have to have a driver's test to make sure that we're safe?
Yeah.
Most of us aren't saying the government is going to take our cars away. Most of us aren't saying that tyranny because we have to register our car, right? So if we could help maybe the far right extreme understand this, then maybe things would be better.
Mm.
However, I do know from other research that this is a hugely emotional issue.
Yeah.
Even though, probably 70% of the people would be fine with this, the remaining 30% of the country, and this is data from other work that we've done, this goes through the roof in terms of emotional response. I mean, it's rabid, almost it is unreasonable in my opinion. But so we just have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
A way to facilitate this was just help people understand logical fallacies. Slippery slope is a logical fallacy, and it doesn't really apply to events that are independent of each other. For example, we didn't lose our guns when Obama was president for 2 terms, right?
Right.
We didn't lose any of that. So
Yeah.
doesn't make it any easier, but just I thought he had a very interesting proposal. Commentary on chapter 7.
I thought there would be some emphasis on like assault weapons or high capacity magazines and bump stocks and all of that, like somehow limit the truly, the machine gun kind of a thing.
Yeah, so I don't recall that it came up here. We were, and I were referring to our notes last night, looking through that, but that could certainly be something that we would discuss here, because I think that would be
I think
open
it's relevant.
for
to talk
debate.
about.
Yeah, I mean, it
is
should
an
be
issue.
one that we would bring
It's an
up in our
issue.
table groups. Like, well, okay, if we carry that to its logical end, would we be comfortable with people having their own nuclear bombs?
Yeah.
Most people would say no. Okay, well, do you want to have their own cruise missile?
Right.
What about their own bazooka and flamethrower?
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, yeah, so
It is
it's like,
where do you draw the line?
but yeah, this should
That's a
be
discussion.
part of the discussion.
Yeah.
And I think we would, if we had a table, we would just compare let's say we get 5 table groups, what each table group came up with, right? Some might say, I think we've already banned the bump stocks, but some might say, hey, it's a 20 capacity magazine, or others might say 30 is fine, or 10, It's okay, I think, somewhere in that space.
Right.
On the assault rifles, we'll get into definitions of assault rifle. Again, this is me talking, not so much Dr. Bach.
Right.
It'd be interesting to see where people go with this.
Yep.
Rich,
Go ahead, Susan.
yes, on number 5, licensed gun owners, the same way those who drive a car or sell alcohol are licensed. I know it was earlier in the year I was talking to a neighbor of mine in the building, and he has guns, and we were talking about this, and of course, and he's conservative, but we had talked about this, about licensing gun owners, and the distinction he drew to this, to Bach's suggestion about licensing gun owners is he just said, no, I have a Second Amendment right to defend myself. Why should I put this in the category of getting licensed to drive a car or to sell alcohol or these other licenses we've created? I shouldn't have to have a license, for a Second Amendment right. And that's, from his viewpoint, that's how he sees it.
Yeah, I don't see how this infringes on your Second Amendment right, though. You still have that ability. And plus, okay, if you want to carry that argument true, then what about the mentally ill and the felons? We've just taken away their Second Amendment rights by not allowing them to have guns. I would be curious as to how he would answer that.
And also think
I'm
about,
sorry.
the freedom of speech, right? We don't allow you to say,
Yell fire.
yeah, fire or bomb on a, airplane. So I think, yeah,
There's
some
limits on
flaws
everything.
to some of
I would challenge his logic, but okay.
But it's also a demonstration of how he links, he sort of looks at this simplistically and wouldn't look into this idea that licensing doesn't preclude his Second Amendment rights. See what I mean?
that. Well, it's a safety issue for the people in your home, right? If you don't, it's like protecting
Right.
other people.
And like all of these, it's going to be debated, right? There's no way that we would just show these 5 things and expect everybody to agree. It's more of as we intended with phase 2, through multiple dinners, through multiple nights of getting together, we would help people feel comfortable with each other, and they begin to trust each other and begin to see that they're part of the family, that they get rational discussion about this, and help at least see each other's sides of the issue, and work towards something together. Right, that is a key thing we want to do. Is you don't have to solve everything, but try to make progress as Wisconsinites here, or even as Umbrookers at the beginning, to move the forward a little bit. Okay, but yeah, we could go on and on. I mean, FYI, Lena and I own multiple weapons, including assault rifles, but we have no problem with any of this. Okay, you have to see Lena with an AR-15. It's you would not believe it. It's just weird. Okay.
It's not like I enjoy it. No, it was more compulsory.
Story for another time. Okay. We're telling you as Second Amendment people that we are strongly in favor of this. That's my commentary, not Dr. Bach's.
Interesting.
So foreign policy and globalization we did not cover because we had to skip that one. But the quick synopsis is from Dr. Bach was, in general, we're a little bit too enmeshed in world affairs. We cannot completely withdraw.
No.
We have a moral responsibility to seek justice. This is part of being a good neighbor and reminder that we are part of the global community. And we need to play our role, but we are only one part. That was a summary that we did not cover. All right, moving right along, last page here of the quick summary. So race.
Oh boy.
To the current events that we faced here. So as we read through that chapter, I think one thing that really stood out that Dr. Bach mentioned was the racial majority needs to realize that it's very hard for them to understand what it means to be a racial minority. I think particularly for those of us who are not African American or Hispanic American or American Indian, we really don't have much of a clue as to what those people have experienced all their lives. And we don't have a clue, and the underrepresented minorities know that we don't have a clue. This creates a huge misunderstanding, which drives distrust. And this distrust is probably what we're seeing right in front of us in Minneapolis, cities that have, gone crazy right now.
Right.
So here, so this issue This one is not so much about the government. This is really about our hearts. I think
Mm.
churches, we really need to step up here. Because so this is actually a heart issue.
Hmm.
You can't legislate so much love your neighbor, right? You can legislate you can't kill your neighbor, but you can't legislate to love your neighbor. But that is taught to us from the Bible. And then he again points out to systemic injustice, which again, many of us who are not African American, Hispanic American, et cetera, we just have a very difficult time seeing. So some comments that Lena and I put in here is, look, right now this is a big issue. Very first thing is, how could we even just gain an understanding of what it means to be a racial minority?
Mm.
Like, do we even spend time with the racial minorities? How much do we dialogue with them? Have any of us even lived in their communities for a while to add to our experience, right? We don't just, helicopter in on the weekends, do our good deed and come out. Do we actually live amongst them? And I think, Lee, with your time as a missionary, you've probably known the importance of living within a culture to make it imagine, right?
Yeah, although I was kind of thinking this through, well, we clearly stood out. I mean, you just walk down the street and everybody knows you're different. So in that sense, it was maybe similar to feeling like a minority. But we were never a despised minority. I think they always looked up to the Americans. So it was a little bit different than if I were looked at the other way, looked down on being there. So yes, so I think it's pretty different that way. Actually, I don't know about your experience being Asian Americans, if you have some of the same, I don't know. I mean, do you have some of the same feelings? I mean, being a minority, prejudice, and people's take on you. I mean,
Yeah, so personal experience. So I was picked on a lot as a kid for being different. I was the only Asian in the
okay,
community, but I grew up in a fairly pluralistic society. We had a lot of African Americans and Hispanic Americans in Waukegan, Illinois. Anyway,
okay,
uh, but at work, I have definitely seen implicit bias show up. Like so I lead the Asian American group there, or I did a few years back, and I decided to walk around with one of the African American groups. And
okay,
yeah, so I just walked around with him all day. And it was particularly telling when we went to our fitness center. Normally we have to show our badges when we walk in. The only person that was asked to show their badge was the African American guy, my friend.
oh wow,
And that the fitness center guy didn't even realize that he had singled him out.
wow,
That was like, pretty eye-opening to me as another quote unquote minority.
right,
I don't have it anywhere near as bad as my African American friends.
yeah. So my our grandson Daniel is our daughter's Hispanic. She's Ecuadorian, adopted by us, and the dad for her oldest is African American. So he looks black. So his dad actually had the talk with him about you got to be careful. You can't do the things that other people would do. You'll be taken differently. And right when we were talking about it, he went. My daughter asked him to go get something from the car, and so he ran out to the car, and it was locked, but a window was open, so he climbed in through the window. And we were just thinking to ourselves, yeah, I mean, if it was a white kid crawling through a car window, you probably wouldn't think of anything, but all of a sudden you realize, oh, black kid crawling through a car window, the sense is that it's something very different. So
Yeah.
I realized, yeah, he's going to have to face things that are different than I did being white. So
Yeah. And I think he recognized that growing up. I don't know if all of us who are not African American recognize this kind of implicit bias and injustice.
right.
Though we have to help those say on the left realize that every time they use the term racist, because we don't get this, it's like, it just like puts us off.
Right.
And so we have to help bridge that gap. But, you know, it's
Right.
our class is build more understanding. To call us racists and haters, guys, you're working against yourself. Let's
Right.
understanding.
Right. The term implicit bias is probably more instructive. I think that is really helpful. Our company's done a lot of it too. So, I thought the letter that was included with Pastor Lee's by, I can't think of his name right now. This week, the letter that he shared about how he's trying to bridge things in the community. So,
I thought it was really, really good. I thought his message was great about racism here.
yeah, yeah.
So, and then, you know, Susan, you remember when we talked to Pastor Lee about that
Mhm.
with the three of us?
Okay.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Because he shared privately with us about his time growing up in North Carolina versus how things were when he came here.
Oh,
It was,
He says there are a lot more prejudiced people here.
yeah,
here.
I believe how
yeah, he
many,
couldn't believe it. It
how
was like,
blatant it was, and yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
that was interesting because I would have guessed the opposite. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
but yeah, we'll have to talk more with him.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. Certainly, this is the time of the day, and this one, you know, when we facilitate this, this is probably not going to be more towards policy. It's probably going to be on, you know, church involvement.
Hmm.
Okay, education. Moving right along. So, Dr. Bach said, "Hey, Bible talks of both private and public education. Children were taught the word and godly character from their parents, but they also received a liberal education about literature, languages, etc., of other nations. So they, you know, you gave an example of Moses and Daniel, you know, as two leaders, certainly in different circumstances than your average Jew, but that was valuable instruction for them. He kind of summarized this as, look, all of education is supposed to prepare you to be successful in your life's works, as well as to be of strong character. Those two are important. So I think as we debate and discuss this, there is room for both public and private education. I do remember when we would go to the homeschooling conferences that some of the homeschoolers were like, if you go to public school, you're sinning. I'm like, okay, I don't know if I would go that far. But I think there's room for both.
Right.
We just have to make sure that we help people understand that, okay, even though we support private education, we got to make sure it doesn't come at the expense of the public, and also make sure that you're committed to being part of the solution and not just going somewhere else because you're able to afford it or whatever.
Right.
So I think that was that. And we actually are one of the oldest states to have some form of school choice.
Okay.
Looking at the data for Wisconsin will be interesting. And that, we can go another time. It's actually not really super conclusive, but it is interesting to note Wisconsin.
When did it start in Wisconsin? Do you know?
I don't remember the exact year. We can look it up, but I think it's been over 25 years of us doing like this. All right, the family. So on this one, not much wiggle room at all. All right, pretty much for the Christian, same-sex marriage, at least according to Dr. Bach's interpretation, is a non-starter. However, we make this distinction that this is same-sex legal marriage, and it is not the same as biblical marriage. So I think what we can get out of this is that, hey, solid families are important, and it's hugely important in the Bible. Can a legal same-sex marriage be a strong family? There's no evidence to say that can't be done, but it's only been since 2015, so probably not soon enough. So I don't know if there's much room to thread the needle for Christians on this one. The only way to thread the needle, and again, Susan, we've talked about this with Pastor Lee that one time, was on just emphasizing that legal marriage is not the same as biblical marriage. That's why we don't fear the government coming in and telling Christians to perform spiritual same-sex marriages. We say that's the realm of the churches, the temples, the mosques, however they want to do it. But legal marriage is just that certificate on paper that any government can enact.
Right, so you're saying that as Christians, we could say we don't agree with same-sex marriage, but we understand that the state has the right to say that there's a legal marriage, that's the same-sex legal marriage. And we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to same-sex legal marriage by the state, but we would oppose saying that the church has to recognize that as morally, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We would really disagree with the state if they said we had to recognize a legal same-sex marriage as a spiritual biblical marriage,
I see.
which we don't. This is me talking, not so much Dr. Bach. Lena and I don't see the government ever doing that. That would be a huge affront on the First Amendment.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is, in our opinion, the government's, it's put up by the Constitution. They can just determine contracts, because legal same-sex marriage is essentially a contract. So
Right.
who rights, who gets inheritance, how do you divide property in case of divorce, etc.
Right.
Nothing about sex or love or how you raise kids. And all of that is more in the realm of biblical marriage, right?
Right.
Yeah, when I think about this, I just grieve because I feel like if the church had gotten that understanding, that distinction between legal marriage and biblical marriage earlier, and not push back so much against gay marriage, legal marriage, that the vitriol, the hatred, the anger would be so much less.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think that is interesting. I think as Elmbrook has to deal with this eventually, I don't think we will go down the path of performing spiritual same-sex marriages in Elmbrook. I could be wrong, but I'm just guessing here.
Yeah.
Not. I mean, there are ways. We studied it in one other class. I can't remember, but clearly, Dr. Bach says it's not really that defensible. But we should remember that legal same-sex marriage is something different, and if we can treat it that way, maybe that is a way to find peace and understanding amongst the multiple tribes. All right, any questions more about the family?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, then the last topic, he saved the toughest one for the last one, abortion. Okay, so similar to the family, not much wiggle room here. Look, if we truly take scripture to heart, I mean, life begins in the womb. Life of a child is valuable. We are to love our neighbors as ourselves. So for Christians, adoption is a good option. I think, and this is my commentary here, this is probably the toughest issue out of all 13 chapters. Probably this and guns will be the ones that either we get the most hate thrown upon us as facilitators, or it'll be the ones where the groups struggle the most. We might save them for the end. But it's hard because this issue, it's not gonna be facts and logic and reason that decide this one. This touches to the core of who we are.
Right.
So I would say for those of us who maybe lean more right than left, we should remember, I don't think everybody knows this, that the rate and the number of total abortions has been steadily declining for 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
It's been coming down. So, and then we got to help the left understand, okay, are you sure you really want to go down the path of, if there's one little hair left in the woman's vagina as you deliver the baby, you still want to say it's perfectly fine to kill the baby.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know how
I think
this one's
too,
going to be tough.
well, this is how I see it. I mean, even Jesus said that if you look at someone with hatred, that's like murder, right? So to me, I feel like there is room for grace, and that we can't, yes, we protect life, but we have to understand, if, until you're in that situation, you don't know how you're going to respond, and there needs to be room for grace. And so my sense is, when I talk to a lot of believers, they are not necessarily interested in overturning and banning, making abortion illegal. Most of them are willing to compromise. They just don't like third-term abortions. That's what I understand. So I actually think that there is a place for common ground here.
Yeah. I think that the late term abortions to most people just are gut wrenching, because in some cases they're the same time frame that struggles, or a couple would be struggling to save their baby, and yet another person can choose to terminate the baby's life. So I think that's particularly hard. The early, very, very early things, and I guess I'm not a medical person, but I mean, things like the morning after pill, is that considered an abortion? I mean, I can kind of, I almost think that some of the debate over abortions will almost go away if things like the morning after pill are available more widely. I don't know, Susan, your medical background, maybe, I don't know if you want to comment to that?
Well, one comment I did want to make is that, as Rich had cited, that the rate of abortions has gone down, but that's also because the number of options, particularly for women, for contraception has grown exponentially.
True.
And one of the things I always take notice of in the discussions of abortions, whatever stage it is that we don't have enough discussion about contraception, the very thing that will prevent
Yeah.
this fear-filled act, for both the the woman that's experiencing it and those who oppose it too, and the idea of it. So I know myself, I always try, when someone gets on this, I always try to get them into this arena of, well, what about contraception? What about going further back in this event process, and looking how we can stop it from the very onset. And if you have, for example, the Catholic Church preventing this, or not, this is part of the solution. This
Right.
isn't making it worse. This is part of the solution for the resistance against, women's choice to do with their body. And again, I know when I get in these discussions, I try to refrain from even talking about this procedure and even the time frame of it, and I try to steer the conversation to people's understanding of what's available in contraception.
Yeah.
And and why aren't we exploring more and more contraceptive options for men and women?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Susan, you and Lee both bring up good points. I think when we do this, we'll probably have to keep it very contained, right? It could be just, let's just talk about contraception and the morning after pill, right? We're not going to talk about late-term abortion. We're not going to talk about anything else. We're just going to focus on this issue. That may be one way to help the teams not get, help the table groups not get too bunny-holed, because this all issues can be really bunny hole. And
Right.
that we're not a Catholic church, because we're probably not as strong on, you know, the
Contraception.
conception as a
Right.
sin. It's a venial sin in the Catholic Church.
Mm.
All right, so that was just the quick and dirty summary. We could not get it to one page, just we wanted 3 pages here. We'll post it on Slack, and hopefully
Okay.
just to get a general sense of where he was coming from in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, this is very helpful.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next part of the agenda. We kind of wanted to say, okay, maybe the next 6 times we get together, if we cover some of these other issues, do you think this would be, after we do this, would we feel prepared enough to work as teams of 2, to lead a table of, maybe 5 to 6 other people, no more than a table, to talk through one of these issues that, like, say, immigration, we just talked about? Would this prepare us to help people from killing each other and help people actually have a productive dialogue, knowing that they come from different political leanings?
Right.
If not, what else would we need to have in here? Thoughts?
I think we'll know more when we get to level 7 and actually do one. I think that
Yep.
we'll have to decide, do we need more practice? Do we need to go over?
It's fine. We may not have a choice, because
I think
we may not even be allowed to get back together yet.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So,
Is there any layering that's missing, guys, that, as far as you can see? Because it's totally flexible. This is just us as a class determining what we want to do.
I would just like to say that in the past, when we've done these role-playing, this role-playing activity, I thought that was very helpful.
Okay. So I think we can certainly use that here. 7 and 8, so great suggestion. Okay, so we don't need to solve it all now. If there's something else that comes up to you and about this, we'll feel free to post it on Slack, and we'll think. We can adjust on the fly too. I just want us to feel like, okay, we'll never be like totally confident, but if we get 8 strangers coming in, we don't know whether, some of them lean left or some of them lean right, but we're going to talk about gay marriage. Well, or can we handle it as a team of 2? We just want to be able to feel like, yes, we could handle, even if some guy gets mad and calls another person a name, what would we do?
Yeah.
All right. Then the last thing that I wanted to circle back on today was something, Lee, you had mentioned offline or in the Slack, is on what we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we haven't yet done is we need to kind of just make sure that every single one of us, and we'll have to go by one to say, are we in agreement after going through this session that we can say these are generally reliable sources that we table groups to refer to when they're pulling for information? So to me, this is critically important. If we can't even agree as a class that we can point people and say, yes, these are good, we not proceed further until we get to that point. And then, Lee, you brought up something even further of like, well, what about the fact checkers, which I didn't even list here? How do we know what they do, and can we trust them, blah, blah, blah.
All right.
So let me just...
I think the thing, I guess, first, Rich, this has been really, really good and educational for me. What I'm not sure of is if people who have a very strong mindset, and I think it's going to be harder for people on the hard right, because the people on the far left probably would trust these sources, NPR and Politico or whatever. But if people on the far right, I just think they're going to have a hard time, because, and in large part because even President Trump has said all these liberal, the mainstream media, and this is the mainstream media. So he's kind of discrediting, by his statements, he's kind of discrediting everything that we're saying is trustworthy. So it's almost like you're going up against, well, who do you trust? Do I trust Ad Fonts who supposedly they have a good approach, or do I trust President Trump? Well, I trust President Trump because he's going against the establishment. So I understand the logic. I think it's super helpful. To me, it was very insightful. But what I'm concerned is that people who are already in one camp are not going to be swayed by it by logic and analysis.
I totally share your concern. That's why I'm kind of like, I want to get all of us on the same page, because we have a range of views, even with our own class.
Yeah.
We have to kind of say, okay, guys, do we at least recognize if we don't have the same sources of truth, we will never solve any of these. Because how do we know if one source for immigration says we have no immigration problem, and another says we have millions flooding over the borders every day?
Right.
You know, how do we determine what is truth? And we'll never be able to solve it.
Right.
I mean, on the other sheet that we have shared before, we did say that we need to disengage with people, and this was more towards individual conversations. If a person feels Google is biased or just completely disagrees with the media bias chart, step back and just try to listen, because we won't
Right.
common ground if we can't get to common sources of truth.
Yeah.
I had a thought, because I know a lot of people watch Fox News.
Yeah.
There is some good reporting on Fox News. And so I feel like if we are going to have any hope, if we want to continue this, we might need to acknowledge those Fox News reporters who are trustworthy.
Yeah.
Because I can see where it can be very confusing if you do really feel like they're trustworthy, and then you see media bias chart and says, oh, they're not trustworthy at all, then
Right.
it's very frustrating. And so I
Sure.
think that there needs to be some accommodation for acknowledging the truth that is spoken on Fox News.
Right.
I think if we can point to, like, look, guys, even on the slide here, we said you can trust Harris Faulkner. Okay, she's really good. You can trust Chris Wallace. You could probably add Brett Baier in here, right? But you know, if you want to listen to Sean Hannity for entertainment purposes, okay. But he's one of the most distrusted. Look at him for entertainment value, and do not have your opinion swayed by him. Just listen to him very critically. But Wallace, Harris Faulkner, maybe we'll list a couple others you can trust. I don't know, me or Susan, if you guys watch Fox News or not, or you have an opinion, how do we help this hard right group, if at all possible, to open up to more broader sources, or even things that we just mentioned here from Fox?
I know I've been asked by my neighbors about what, who tend to be very conservative, about what sources I use, after we've had discussions. But I agree with Lee. I think there's an entrenchment and an allegiance and a belief that even something as neutral as Reuters, Bloomberg, NPR, maybe that skews a little left, is not to be trusted. This idea is so entrenched that even when I tell them, well, I go to National Public Radio for for the facts and to get both sides. I found that even when they ask me and I tell them, they kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They just when I run into them again, they say, well, I saw on Fox News this, and I listened to Rachel Maddow on that. And I guess that's where I start to realize that, as Lee was saying, this is really difficult to.
Let me ask you guys this. What if, like, before we even started the discussions on the topics from How Would Jesus Vote, if we spent a session or two on basically going through the video we posted on YouTube, Lee, on, okay, this is how we arrived at this conclusion. We're not telling you to trust us. We're saying, does this process of assessing veracity, expression, fairness,
Right.
graphic, does this make sense to you?
Well, see, yeah. I mean, that's what I hear from these people who ask me, what do I, where do I get my news? Then I come forth with it. I sense from them that there's a subconscious, I think there's a subconscious understanding on their part that they're not getting the whole picture. So when I tell them, well, go to these other sources, then they're very reluctant to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I also find that many people just don't want to be students of the issues. They want concrete, simple memes and answers to things. They don't want to be a student and listen to a 10-minute interview on two opposing sides, like you would have on, PBS.
Now remember that the people that we're inviting to these table groups, they'll be the ones that respond to say, look, they want to bring more unity. So that might be self-selecting in our favor. But Lee, I don't know, did some of your conservative family members get to watch the video? Did they have an opinion?
Yeah, I haven't sent it to him, Rich, so I need to send it to him. But I do want to do that. So it was the explanation you gave last week was really, really good. And so Susan, I had asked Rich if I could forward that on to them. And I haven't yet, but I will. And I'd be curious to hear how they respond. So.
Yep. Okay, so look, guys, we'll talk more with Kevin and Dawn and Ray and Barb.
And Barb, yes. So Kevin and Dawn are out this week. Is that was it?
Yeah, they're on vacation, and
okay.
Not sure where Ray and Barb are, but we'll circle back with everybody and just kind of. I'm thinking this is a very important issue.
Yeah, it really is. I'm just not, and I think you're doing a great job of trying to tackle it. I don't think it's a thorny issue that, as a whole country, we're trying to come to grips with. So, if you can solve it, you'll get a lot bigger audience than just us.
I think it's solve it. I do believe that if we don't get the same facts, we're never going to solve these issues.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and I was going to write to you about it, and I'll send you some of the links. What it was, and I don't know if I can summarize it that accurately, but it was implying that people don't really want to do that. They just want answers that fuel their anger. And I think it was rooted in a study, and it had to do with the difference between anxiety and anger. If people are anxious, then they'll start looking for a different alternative, and they're open. But if they're just angry, then they're pretty much entrenched and will keep their position, and they just look for the news and sources that will reinforce that anger. So I'll send on those links.
Can you post it on Slack?
I can do that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. We would appreciate that.
So.
But I think I was just going to say, it is so important to actually have a dialogue. I can't stress how important it is that we actually talk to each other.
I concur with that, Lena.
This is so sad.
Right.
And so I'm still committed to trying to bridge the divide.
No, it's good.
Yeah. So if the 8 to 10 of us in the class, I think let's prove it out ourselves. If we can have a dialogue, right? Because we have even within ourselves, we have a range of views. If we can make it work for us, then maybe we can make it work for those who want to help bring more unity. It certainly is not going to work for those who don't want unity, right? That's not our audience.
Yeah.
Right.
not to persuade someone to change their mind about their conviction. The goal is to find common ground to help
Solve
solve
those
the
problems, yeah.
Right.
So they
Of course,
that
you
advise, or, you know, we can try and convince, and you never know where it'll lead, but
Right.
I think that's,
but then you'd have to set aside your anger, right?
Right.
yeah,
That,
right.
Yeah.
you know, you'd have to be willing to suspend these strong, visceral, emotive responses, right?
Right.
To
Right.
have a discussion
We have to
And
be,
that's why,
and to listen, right?
and that's why the whole way of why we're setting up the, you know, the dialogue, the dinner discussions is you have a dinner that puts people at ease, makes them feel safe. We do icebreakers to help people feel like, hey, we have a lot in common. Remember when we did that little fun exercise in class? Well, find 10 things you have in common with your group of two.
Yes, yes,
Right?
Right.
very helpful.
We help break down these barriers, and maybe we will be able to then, you know, be in better receptivity for receiving the media. But
Right.
Lee, I would love if you can post that
I'll do that.
Slack. That would be very helpful.
Okay, cool.
Okay, guys, we are a little bit over our time. I want to respect our time, but this has been a very great discussion. Susan,
Yeah.
thank you much for sharing about your situation. We did not know, but now that we can keep you
Yeah.
informed and check up on you, we are going to be
yeah,
lifting you up and in your corner. Okay?
Well, I appreciate your heart and your ears for listening. You know, I didn't want everyone to think that I just dropped off the face of the earth, but I know this will take some time, and you know, and I'll knock on Mary's door. She as I said, she makes all these masks for everyone, which is a very gracious thing to do. But you know, I appreciate that, because it just was very, like I said, even I've been surprised by my response, and you know, in light of the bigger picture that's happening around,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could use the prayer, and I'll accept the prayer, and hopefully can move beyond this very soon.
All right. Well, you have your
Yeah.
family at Elmbrook here supporting you. Okay.
Well, I appreciate
Can I
that.
ask you to close us in prayer, Lee?
Sure. Heavenly Father, I do thank you for our time and just the vision that Rich and Lena have had to expand our fellowship, to help us be informed citizens of this country and to make an impact for your kingdom more than anything. So thank you, Lord, for that. I pray for the others who are not here.
Mhm.
And Lord, we do just want to continue to lift up Susan, just some of the things she shared from her heart. Pray that you'd bring healing. Pray that you would help her to sleep. Pray that you'd help her to begin working through some of these memories that keep flashing back. So pray for healing, Lord, for your blessing on all of us this week and the next. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, guys.
Lena and
See
Rich.
ya.
Guys,
Have a
great
good
rest of the
afternoon.
afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Yes.
Bye.